Do not underestimate this little black boy, whose story will astound you. His name is Bernard and is a shoe shiner by trade. Despite his young age, you can tell he is smart. He chooses to set up his stall in front of the bank intentionally, where many rich white people visit on a daily basis and will go to him for a shoe shine as he is nearby. Though his job pays little, Bernard has bigger plans. By being close to his customers, he can eavesdrop on insider financial secrets and how the industry works. He keeps the information in a notebook and learns from it. This little boy's dream is to be a banker, which is not going to be easy. Texas in 1939 is not a place for black people to succeed. They are discriminated against and treated poorly. His father told him that his dream was impossible, but the young boy has made up his mind, no matter the odds. Fast forward 15 years later, Bernard packs his bags and moves to Los Angeles with his wife, Eunice, and children. Racism in LA is not as bad as Texas, which allowed him to start a business and become an entrepreneur. While the family has to stay with a relative in a rundown room, Bernard promises his wife that it is only for a short time. He starts as a real estate agent and finds houses for sales in the city for potential clients. He soon notices that areas where black people live are overpopulated while areas with white people have more empty houses. He realizes a golden opportunity in renting and selling real estate the black community. He spots an apartment owned by a white person that is poorly maintained but located right next to a black community, which is ideal. He negotiates with the owner, Patrick, to sell it to him for $30,000 now, and be given an extra $5,000 later when all the rooms are rented out. While the owner thinks it's a good idea, he is afraid of anything risky and rejects Bernard's offer. Bernard manages to glance at the guy's calendar before leaving and saw that it was given by a local bank in town. He gets an idea and makes his way to the bank, where he finds the bank manager who gave Patrick the calendar. The manager's secretary, who is also a racist, refuses to let him meet the manager, forcing Bernard to wait a few hours at the door of the bank for the manager to appear. When he does, Bernard approaches him and says that he knows Patrick, who he knows also happens to be an important customer of the bank, and if he gets a loan from the bank, they will all benefit from it. The manager turns him down straight away. Later that night, Bernard gets a call from Patrick, who asks if he used his name to get a loan from the bank. He owns up to it and apologizes to him for his blunder. However, the owner was not angry, but instead was impressed at Bernard's determination to achieve his goal. With that, Patrick guarantees the loan for him and manages to purchase the property. An old white lady returns home from shopping when she spots a black man at her door and sharply asks him what he was there for. He replies politely that he is renovating the apartment building, and the old lady rudely tells him that workers like you should be careful. Bernard tells her not to worry, as this is his building and he will be very careful with his own property. The rude lady was made speechless and she departs angrily. Police came soon after and they informed Bernard that she called them to report him and asked if he lied about being the owner to the old lady's face. He whips out a copy of the ownership certificate as he anticipated and was prepared for such an encounter. Once the ownership was made clear to the police, they left reluctantly. Bernard returns to the apartment building and sees the old lady again. She tells him to leave as renovation does not happen at night, but he tells her calmly again that he is not a worker, but the owner of the building. She is in total disbelief and moves out of the building a few days later, refusing to live with black people. Bernard rents out her place to a black lady, and as he had expected in the beginning, black tenants came pouring in and the building was fully occupied soon after. Bernard honors his promise to Patrick that guaranteed his loan, and he was very impressed by his success. He offers to start a business with Bernard as partners. The plan is for Bernard to choose the house and calculate the earnings, and his partner will be in charge of negotiating and signing of contracts. This way, white people won't know that Bernard is in any way involved, and both partners can benefit from this arrangement. Bernard agrees to the partnership and the business takes off successfully, and soon he becomes rich. He moves out of his apartment and into a mansion. He understands that he cannot react negatively to racism, as that means they would win and he would lose. However, success cannot be without challenges, and sure enough, Patrick grows old and weak and dies shortly after a few years. His shares in the partnership is transferred to his widow, who is a racist and does not want to work with Bernard. She insults him by offering to buy his shares at a very low price and threatens to sue him if he does not agree to her unfair terms. Bernard knows that as a black man, he is likely to lose in a lawsuit in court during such a time. However, he wants a fair shot at proving his case, so he heads out to find someone who would testify to his legitimate partnership. The bank manager comes to mind, but he finds out that he is on the widow's side and avoids him. Bernard feels very defeated as he stands in the bank and stares at the place, which makes it difficult for black people like him to succeed in life. That realization turns into inspiration, as a crazy plan slowly forms in his mind. Bernard decided that if he buys the bank, he would not have to deal with discrimination anymore. Bernard heads out to find another black real estate developer and found a wealthy club owner named Joe, and shares his plan with him. Joe thinks Bernard has lost his mind as the land of the building is very expensive real estate and no black person has ever bought land in downtown LA. However, after some discussion, Joe discovers that Bernard's plan does make sense once he heard that he wants to buy it to end discrimination. They need a front person, and Bernard picks Matt Steiner, who had been one of his renovation workers, to take on this role. They spend a month teaching him how to golf and about money and the math of property and buildings. Matt is able to memorize enough information to convince the owner to sell, and Bernard and Joe become the first black men to own a building in downtown LA. From there, they become extremely successful in buying over 100 properties all over Los Angeles. A few years later in 1963, Bernard goes to visit his father in Willis, and his son observes the racism and segregation still taking place, which saddens him. Bernard has another bold idea. He wants to buy the local mainland bank and finally give loans to black people to allow them to become homeowners or start small businesses to help them improve their lives. Joe knows they will face extreme racism and thinks it's a terrible idea, but when Bernard declares he will do it on his own, Joe gets on board. They again need Matt to pose as the buyer, rousing the suspicions of the bank's current owner's son, Robert Florence Jr., who will remain on as a 20% shareholder. The plan is successful at first, and they are able to give loans to black people, but Florence eventually catches on and threatens them that if the people find out, all the white people will pull their money out. Meanwhile, Matt's wife pressures him to not just be an employee, but an owner. Matt presents Joe and Bernard a plan to buy a second bank. They think it's too risky, but Matt tells them if he can run his own bank he has to move on, and with no white person in charge at mainland, they would be doomed, so they reluctantly agree. Matt buys a collection of loan packages, and soon his bank is under a federal audit. It turns out he did not use the lawyer Bernard recommended, but due to time pressure, he got one from Florence, who then put bad loans into the package. Matt then buys those loans at mainland, thinking it will fix the problem, but actually gets him, Joe, and Bernard all arrested under federal banking laws. Senator McClellan is running the federal trial, and threatens Matt that he will receive decades in prison if he doesn't say that he did everything as Joe and Bernard ordered and frame them as masterminds. McClellan wants to use the trial to change banking laws so that the owners are always public information, which will prevent minorities from ever owning again. He tells Bernard if he doesn't make it political during his testimony and simply says he was a crook, he can avoid jail time. At the hearing, Bernard passionately explains that the system prevents black people from getting an opportunity for advancement and the American dream. He and Joe lose all their properties but one and are sentenced to 3 years in jail, and Florence takes ownership of mainland. When Bernard is released, Joe and Eunice pick him up. When she asks where they're going, Bernard reveals the night before his testimony, Matt called him horribly guilty, and he was able to get him to transfer 2 homes in the Bahamas. The movie ends showing that Joe and Bernard were able to start over and begin doing business from the Bahamas. In 1968, the Fair Housing Act was passed, making it illegal for anyone to deny renting to someone based on the color of their skin.